Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into Hell's Kitchen history, mid-Manhattan.
Yeah, we're looking at the Westies, an Irish-American organized crime group. Pretty notorious.
They really cast a long shadow, didn't they? Especially considering their main run was, what, mid-60s to 88? Relatively short in the grand scheme.
That's right. And for this, we're mainly leaning on a pretty detailed Wikipedia entry covering their story, the main players, their activities.
Right. So the mission here is to kind of pull out the essentials, understand their impact, maybe find some surprising bits about how they rose and ultimately how it all fell apart.
And the first thing that really jumps out, I think, is the size versus the reputation.
Totally. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe 12 to 20 core guys,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, small inner circle,
Hmm.
but linked to an estimated 60 to 100 murders. That's that's pretty intense.
It's staggering, really, that level of violence from such a tight crew.
And, the name everyone knows them by, the Westies.
Yeah.
Turns out that was just the press. They never actually called themselves that.
Yeah, no kidding. Huh. So it's like an outside label that stuck. Shows how perception works, I guess.
Definitely. So, okay, where does it all start? Early 60s, Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah.
You mentioned a power vacuum.
Exactly. The previous gang leaders were sort of fading out, trying to avoid heat from the law.
Right. And into that space steps Huey Mulligan, a mobster from Queens, actually.
And he brings in a local guy as his, apprentice, Mickey Spillane.
That's the one. Spillane eventually takes the reins himself, sets up shop with the usual stuff, gambling, bookmaking.
Policy, too, right? That illegal numbers game.
Mm-hmm. And loan sharking, of course. The classic rackets.
But Spillane, he wasn't just, a typical gangster figure, was he? There was this other side.
Yeah, the source mentions this. Community stuff. Sending
Yep.
flowers to people in the hospital. Giving out Thanksgiving turkeys.
It's such a weird contrast, isn't it? Crime boss and neighborhood benefactor, sort of.
It is, and you got to wonder, was it genuine? Or was it about building loyalty, maybe keeping people quiet? Probably a bit of both.
Creates a complicated picture anyway. But he didn't just rely on, street-level goodwill. He tapped into real power structures.
Right, through connections. The McManus family, the Midtown Democratic Club, that gave them leverage, didn't it?
Huge leverage over union jobs, labor racketeering. This wasn't just about the docks anymore.
No, they moved into big construction. The New York Coliseum, Madison Square Garden, and the really big one, the Jacob K. Javits Convention Center.
That Javits Center project. That seems like a turning point. Put them right in the crosshairs of the Italian mafia, specifically the Genovese family.
Absolutely. This is the 1970s. Huge money involved in that construction. The Genovese family obviously wanted a piece of the action in Hell's Kitchen.
But Spillane just said no, even though he was way outnumbered.
Yeah, flat out refused to let them in. It's pretty bold.
Takes some serious nerve. Or maybe arrogance? What do you think drove that? Just defending turf.
Probably. Backing down would look weak,
Right.
undermine his whole position in Hell's Kitchen. So maybe it was a calculated risk, albeit a massive one.
Well, the Genovese family didn't take it lightly. They decided to hit back hard.
Uh-huh. They brought in a hitter, Joseph Mad Dog Sullivan, an Irish-American guy himself, interestingly.
To do what? Take out Spillane's guys.
His top lieutenants, Tom Devaney, Eddie the Butcher Comiskey, and Tom the Greek Kapaitos. A clear message. Escalation.
And this kind of violence, it just feeds into the next conflict, doesn't it? The internal stuff, the Spillane-Coonan wars.
Right. James Coonan. The feud apparently started way earlier. Coonan was just 18.
What happened?
Story goes, Spillane kidnapped and pistol-whipped Coonan's father. So Coonan retaliates, gets on a rooftop in 1966,
Man.
opens up with a machine gun on Spillane and his crew.
Whoa. Did he hit anyone?
Apparently not seriously, but talk about making a statement.
Yeah, no kidding. But Coonan did time for manslaughter after that, right?
He did. Got out in late 71, and the war just picked right back up. It got so hot that Spillane actually moved his family out of Hell's Kitchen. Yeah, Woodside. But moving out, that must have weakened his grip on the neighborhood, day-to-day control.
Created an opening for Coonan, definitely. And the Genovese family saw their chance too. Anthony Salerno.
Right. Salerno supposedly cut a deal with Coonan. Basically, help us get rid of Spillane, become the boss, and you get the Javits Center action. But give us a piece.
A classic mafia move. Exploit the internal conflict.
Exactly. And it spelled the end for Spillane's loyalists. Salerno hired Sullivan again.
Mad Dog Sullivan.
Yep, to take out Devaney, Comiskey, and Kapaitos. Late 76, early 77.
Even even Comiskey? Wasn't there some rumor he might have already flipped to Coonan?
Yeah, that's an interesting wrinkle. Sullivan might not have even known. But either way, those hits basically cleared the decks for Coonan.
But Spillane himself was still around, just
It's
weakened.
not for long. The Genovese weren't done. In 77, Spillane was assassinated.
By who? Sullivan again?
No, this time it was Roy DeMeo from the Gambino crime family, reportedly as a favor to Coonan. Coonan wanted Spillane gone for good to cement his takeover.
DeMeo? That's a heavy hitter. And Mickey Featherstone. Wasn't he mixed up in the Spillane murder trial?
He was charged, yeah, but acquitted. Just shows how messy these things are and how hard convictions could be back then.
So Spillane's out, Coonan's in, and he starts building bridges, or strengthening them, rather, with the Gambinos.
Big time. Paul Castellano was the boss then. Roy DeMeo was their main contact with Coonan's crew.
Makes sense. A smaller gang like the Westies, they need that kind of backing, right? Protection, resources.
Absolutely. And for the Gambinos, they get a reliable, very ruthless crew to handle certain jobs. Contract killings, stuff like that. Things they might not want their own made guys doing directly.
A symbiotic relationship, you could say.
Yeah, definitely a violent one. And it seemed to work for a bit. Coonan and Featherstone beat a murder rap in 79, right? Harold Whitehead.
Yeah, a bartender. And then James McElroy, another Westie, got acquitted for killing a Teamster in 80. They seemed almost untouchable for a moment.
Even when Coonan and Featherstone did get locked up in 1980 on different charges, the operation kept running back in Hell's Kitchen. They had things set up pretty well.
And their Gambino connection evolved too, right? After DeMeo was, well, after DeMeo met his own end.
Yeah, DeMeo was murdered. Then Coonan's link became Daniel Marino, and later, John Gotti himself. So they stayed plugged into the top level of the Gambino family, served as their go-to hit squad, essentially.
But these things rarely last forever, do they? The downfall always seems to come, often from the inside.
And that's exactly what happened here. Early 1986, Mickey Featherstone gets convicted of a murder.
Okay.
But Featherstone felt he'd been framed, set up by Coonan and the others. So he decides to flip, cooperate with the government.
The classic informant situation. That must have sent shockwaves through the crew.
Had to. And Featherstone, along with his wife Sissy, they provided a lot of information. Recordings, too. It was huge.
What did that lead to?
Well, first, Featherstone's own murder conviction got overturned. But more importantly, it led directly to the arrests of Coonan and a bunch of other Westies on state charges.
And then the feds got involved. I remember Rudolph Giuliani making a name for himself prosecuting Mafia cases around then.
Exactly. Giuliani brought a massive Araico indictment, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It let them go after the whole gang as a criminal enterprise, not just piecemeal crimes. Targeted 2 decades of activity.
And Featherstone was the star witness.
He testified for 4 weeks straight. The trial started in September 87. He laid out everything. The murders, the rackets, the whole inner workings.
Must have been devastating testimony.
Absolutely. The result? Major convictions in 1988. Coonan got 60 years. McElroy, Richard Muggsy Ritter, long sentences too. It basically broke the back of the gang.
So that's essentially the end of the Coonan-Featherstone era Westies. But the story doesn't quite stop there, does it? There's this Yugo era.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange coda. Hell's Kitchen was changing demographically anyway, less street crime overall perhaps. But after the main guys were gone and another leader named Kelly went on the lam.
Someone else stepped in.
This guy, Boko Radonjic, an American Serbian nationalist. He'd been a low-level associate of Coonan since '83. He apparently took over what was left.
A Serbian running the remnants of an Irish gang, that shows how things were shifting.
Definitely. And Radonjic is this whole other interesting shadowy figure. There were even allegations he helped fix John Gotti's 1986 racketeering trial, the one Gotti famously beat.
Wow. So he had connections. What happened to him?
He was eventually arrested in Miami in '99, but got released because the main witness against him was Sammy the Bull Gravano, and, well, Gravano's credibility was questionable by then.
Understatement of the year, maybe.
Probably. So Radonjic went back to Serbia, died there in 2011.
And that was really it for the Westies name, except for that minor thing later.
Pretty much. There was a brief mention in 2012, some guy named John Boken, nephew of former members, involved in marijuana smuggling. But the authorities said it had no real tie to the original gang. The name just kind of echoed.
Which brings us right back to the beginning, doesn't it? The name, the Westies. A media invention they never even used.
It's wild. They're known universally by a name they didn't choose. It really speaks to the power of media narratives in shaping how we remember these groups.
So summing up this whole dive, We've got this small, incredibly violent Irish-American crew in Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, navigating really dangerous waters, clashing with the Italian Mafia, brutal internal power struggles.
Making alliances of convenience, like with the Gambinos, which shows you those complex underworld dynamics.
Until betrayal from within, combined with effective law enforcement using tools like Ryko, brought the whole thing crashing down.
It's a potent story, and understanding it, I think it gives you, the listener, insight into how these criminal organizations work. Power, territory, violence.
And how they eventually fall apart. It shows how localized groups can have a massive, terrifying impact, but also how fragile they can be when faced with internal dissent and determined prosecution.
So here's a final thought to chew on. We see how the Westies operated, how the neighborhood changed, how leadership shifted even ethnically towards the end.
Right. So considering how cities keep changing, how crime itself evolves, what do new forms of organized crime look like today or tomorrow?
Yeah, how might they be different from a group like the Westies, rooted so strongly in one specific neighborhood and ethnic identity back then? Something to think about.
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.